and thank you for joining me today on Constructive Curiosity. I have some amazing guests today who've authored a book. They're a married couple, and it's going to be really exciting to hear their story, their impacts, and the different things they've learned over the years in leadership, especially. But we're joined by both Dr. Clevelands. We have Simon and Marisa. How are you guys doing today?
Oh, thank you very much, Casey, for inviting us.
Great, thank you so much.
So we're going to get to your book here in a little bit, but like I kind of gave you a warning beforehand, let's learn a little bit about how you two got together and what brought you to where you
are. I'm going to go ahead and get started, Marisa, and then you can follow up if you'd like. We met in college, believe it or not. We were going to the same university, George Mason University, and it just so happened that our paths crossed. And the moment I saw Marisa, I knew I was going to marry her. So we dated. We actually got married at the university's chapel, and we've been together, I would say, for 30 years now or more, making 23 years of 24 years this year of marriage, but we've been longer together than that. So it's been a wonderful journey. In our careers, obviously have taken different paths. I've been a little bit more on the consulting track, and then stumbled into academia. And Marisa was actually an educator for quite some time, and then she pursued as well her academic career, and then more of a nonprofit work and the university work as well. So, but throughout this entire journey, we have kind of learned very, very valuable lessons related to leadership, and we've distilled these lessons in this book about what we consider to be, to us, the most transformative, if you wish, leadership style, which is this relatable leadership. And I'd just like Marisa also talk a little bit about how we met in her journey too.
Oh no, that's we met in college.
Short, sweet, to the point, right?
Yeah.
So
it's been good.
Yeah, so a little background on how I actually got you guys on the show. So Simon was the hardest professor I had during my master's program. I'll go ahead and just put that out there. Very challenging classes, but they were worth it. I actually learned something. Yeah, you had to put in a lot of work. Only professor that made us do video cast rather than just the normal discussions. But you know what? That was great, especially for the timing, because that was literally right before COVID hit. So a lot of us had not ever had to deal with remote work being on video. So just to put that out there, thank you for that experience. I was much more prepared than a lot of my peers were, because I've been doing a lot more video stuff than most people had at that point. So great professor to have.
Absolutely. Casey was, one of my top students, and I really enjoyed you having in the class, because you would always have wonderful stories and lessons to share and to incorporate them into the various discussions we had. So it's been a wonderful experience having you in my life, because we'll often communicate and, talk about our career progressions. And I love to keep in touch with all my students and to hear what they've learned and how they've matured and succeeded in their career. So it's great that I had you as a student. I've enjoyed our classes and journey at Georgetown. This particular book does incorporate, as you know, lessons from my experiences at Georgetown and some of the lectures and the courses I've taught there. And so for your listeners, anybody that's interested in kind of maybe dipping their toes a little bit into what is it like to be at Georgetown, you could kind of read a little bit about some of that content that I've introduced in our courses, especially on complexity theory and how good leaders are aware of how complexity plays a role in shaping them to be ever more and better individuals and more relatable individuals to their subordinates. So. But thank you for this opportunity to come and share those lessons on this podcast.
So, and actually, one of the assignments came up a couple of weeks ago. My daughter's in 5th grade, and she was working on a writing assignment. She says 2 pages. I'm like, well, I'd write a 40-page paper. So There we go. You know, I like to embellish. So it wasn't quite, the requirement wasn't 40, but that's what it ended up being. So
It's you've done some great papers, and we've sometimes it's difficult to share what you have in your background in just 1 or 2 pages. Although they say that it's difficult to write shorter papers than longer ones sometimes because you have to synthesize so much of that awareness and that knowledge. But certainly 40 pages, yeah, I mean, there are some assignments in there that require you to definitely introduce quite a bit on some of the lessons we learn in these classes. So,
What class was it?
managing complexity,
Oh,
which was funny because I took that. I had an interesting life circumstance where I had to actually leave Georgetown for a semester. And when I came back, that was the only class that was available. Oh, okay, it was my second class after the intro to the program. It's like, holy crap, this is going to be hard. It was the hardest class I had the entire time.
oh my gosh. Well, when COVID hit, I had the opportunity to overhear Simon do a lecture for his ethical leadership class, and that's part of the book when we were doing the whole book, and I got to read about, like the ethics dilemmas and everything like that. And so I was just wondering if it was that class. I've never heard him lecture for complexity. So
now I took that one as well. You were my professor for that one as well, if I remember, ethical leadership, which was a great class. Great class. Absolutely loved it.
complexity, there is a whole chapter in the book about this, and there's quite a bit of literature out there, as you're familiar with it and resonated with many of the lessons that you shared. It's what really impacts us being better leaders and better project managers. If we aren't aware of the various types of complexity systems that exist and how they interact with each other, and the various biases that we bring into the table. So I'm sure we're going to get into these in the conversation here, but we carry that baggage with us as leaders, and it is needed for us to recognize this baggage. It's necessary for us to explicate it and be aware of it, and really jot it down even, and find out what is our starting line, where did we come from, get to know ourselves better in order to embrace what our qualities are and maybe some of the gaps that we have in order for us to be able to expand these as on our quest to becoming better leaders, and then move forward into this complex world and navigate these different types of factors that impact us as you learn in this class, particularly. And sometimes our humanness is the one that really prevents us the most from being better leaders or project managers. And so being aware of the biases that we carry, of our internal if you wish, barriers that prevent us from to become who we really need to be in order to relate to others better. So it's just in the ethical leadership class that Marisa mentioned and you took as well. It's a very nice rounded framework to introduce to how not only to be a great project manager, but how to be a more of an ethical one during different types of situations.
So let's just jump into the book. We keep hinting at it, so let's stop walking around the subject and get into it. There is no box. Fantastic read. And I've read a lot of leadership books, listened to a lot of books when I'm exercising, and it's different. I'll go ahead and just put that out there. It's different than what I've normally heard for a leadership book because it has two different sides to the story. One of the issues I see, and this is just from my perspective, it's an opinion, so take it for what it is. You get too much into one author, and at times that can be distracting. You lose the quality of the content because you get too much of the author. And I felt like the way you guys had a good back and forth, it'd be from the different perspectives, different life journeys. It was multiple angles, it was multiple perspectives, and you were able to really see holistically the message that you were trying to send. So fantastic job on the writing.
thanks. When Simon was doing one of his leadership, I think it was his master's. It might have been his second doctorate, but I had a chance to read some of his papers, and I was like, these papers and concepts and things that you're pulling together really need to be in a book. And I work in publishing, and so like immediately I'm always looking for like, hey, like who wants to write a book, and like how can I help you get it published? And so I was reading his papers, and he was doing a bunch of research, and I'm sure that you saw it in the book. We use a lot of outside sources because a lot of times like somebody will have the experience from one company or one corporation, and they'll put the book out, and I love it. Like I represent authors that have books published with like Wiley and other business book authors that are popular, but it's from their personal experience. And I thought that what Simon did was very unique because he was taking a bunch of experiences and seeing like this doesn't always work for example, if you're in the military, or servant leadership doesn't work when you're in the middle of a crisis and you need that authoritative, like this is how we should just get it done, and this person has the most experience because they've dealt with it 5 or 6 or 100 times before. And so that's when like the relatable thing kind of came up, where everybody's so locked on, oh, we have to all be transformational leaders or transactional or authoritative or charismatic, or and some situations I found when I was working with like some of the nonprofit leaders, like what I'm thinking, not extroverted, but the introverted leaders were actually the more calming ones that could reach the community, where their audience would listen to them because they fit that personality type. And he was like cultivating this in all his papers and his research, and doing like Survey Monkey and trying to get like results in studies. And I was like, we have to put this in a book. I'm like, give me all your notes. I'm like, let's get this out there, because it's something that anybody can pick up. And really, I feel like when I was working with our agent on it, the book teaches you how to be a better person. And I think most leaders want people to be better people around them. Like leaders don't want to work with a bunch of non-nice people, non-kind, non-productive. And I think what Simon's research that hit on me when I was like, we have to put this into a book, is that leaders do cultivate other leaders, and leaders cultivate people who they want to work with. And that's how you get a really great team and forward momentum. But it's being able to recognize the situation and like what situation calls for which type of leadership. It's not like we all have to be this type of leader, which is what I found a lot of books when I was trying to do research on it, is like explaining like you need these competencies, but you need these competencies for certain situations. So I just love, that was my origin story about how I wanted Simon to write this book and how I jumped on board.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, that's exactly a great point. People don't realize I should put this in a book until somebody brings it to light. You should put this in a book. This is really important, and it's a message, like you said, that can captivate an audience. It can provide perspective. Yeah, leadership is, like, we've all probably read a million leadership books at this point. Like they're just out there. And like you said, they all pick a path you're supposed to take. Well, this is the best style. This is the best style. And you guys hit the nail on the head. There is no best style. It is to be able to adapt them together. And the relatable side of that is being able to know when to be this type of leader, when to be that type of leader, and how to show that with your different audiences. So, Simon, when did you first come up with the relatable leader concept?
That's a good question, Casey. We had a conversation with Marisa about the various types of leadership styles in the very beginning, and it kind of emerged as we started to focus on the 5 aspects that we talk about in our book that really bring relatable leadership together in terms of competencies. They kind of emerged from what we were reading and what we were conversing and what we were reflecting on. And at that point, we were thinking through what exactly would be the best approach to identify these this type of leadership competency that encompasses all these different factors. And I think relatability emerged as a conversation as to what has really driven us to be more accepted by others, for us to be more accepting of other people's opinions. And I quite often make sure that in my classes there's this kind of civility, and we look to understand each other's differences and embrace them and accept them, and work with them through cooperation to whether if students are completing any work, or if as a project manager working through accomplishing certain types of deliverables under certain types of resource constraints or time constraints. And so I think relatable, the term relatable emerged from that conversation and reflection to accomplish these 5 processes, if you wish, that we talk about in our book. And this is how I have it in my mind. It's been several years now that we've crystallized this into that book. I think that book was published almost 2 years ago. But I think Marisa might have a better recollection of how we came up with that.
Oh, well, I remember we were brainstorming terms, like we were just looking at words. And when we started putting together that chart, Simon had written a paper where he put together a chart of all these leadership styles. And I remember when we started working on the communication aspect, and we were talking about how you can't teach empathy because I don't know how much you know about Simon from your classes, but he's very empathetic. And I remember him saying, like, when he worked on a team with some, it was like this team at night. They're all virtual. We were like, he was downstairs on the sofa with like his computer, like 2 or 3 computers up, and they were trying to do this software release. And I remember he was like not like feeling bad, but he was feeling bad for like one guy that had a kid, another guy had like a wife that was sick or something, and he was feeling bad for everybody. But as a leader, you can't just give into that. And so when you're empathetic, it puts you in that really tough situation. And so you can teach compassion. And so even if you can't teach empathy, you can teach compassion, where you can't like put yourself in that other person's shoes, but you can understand their situation and try to see how you can alleviate it without having to pick one over the other. The guy with the sick son versus the guy with the sick wife trying to stay up till 3 a.m. to make sure that the testing works, so that the software works, so that in the morning that people come in. And so when we started doing the compassionate communication section, we were still brainstorming like the type of leadership. And then that chart came up and we're like, well, what does this mean? And the whole thing about communication was, are they able to understand us of what we're trying to say? Are we able to understand them? What word ties all that together? And it's like, hey, can you relate to me? You can't relate to me if you don't have that experience. If I don't have a broken leg, I can't relate to you. But I can still, so I can't have empathy. I'm not like, oh, it hurts, a visceral reaction. But I can have compassion, like, hey, maybe you can't go up 5 flights of stairs. And I think we were just brainstorming words that kind of encapsulated that feeling and that moment that we wanted. And that's when we were like, relatable. Can you relate to it? No. Well, how do you get relatable? You get more experiences. And they don't have to be big. They can be small experiences. Like, we watched a documentary about some refugees, and I was like, people really live like that? And that's how you get more relatable to situations. So I think that's probably the origin story of that word, is we were brainstorming them as we were putting together the table and working on that compassionate communication chapter.
Yeah, because everyone's had somebody, whether you're still a child and you have a teacher that you can't quite connect with, or a coach, or as an adult, everybody's had a boss that you just don't see eye to eye with, and you're so far separated it can really hurt the organization if it gets to a certain point. I know I've had a couple bosses where that was the case. They were very standoffish and would not try to see the rest of the team, knows their way or the highway. And that doesn't bring a very good organization. That causes a lot of turmoil, causes a lot of undue stress, and you can't reach your maximum potential without being able to understand who your players are, what they can bring to the table, and what's going to help them learn, what's going to help them get better. Because at the end of the day, it's not about the leader, and you guys talk about it's not about the leader, it's about how to make the team better to accomplish what you're working toward. So if you don't have that in mind, saying I'm the leader and thumping your chest is getting you absolutely nowhere.
I picked up really good points from this book, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. And we've discussed with Marisa whether there will be a second edition of that book, or maybe we'll do part 2 in some different areas that we wanted to expand further. But I think you've exactly zeroed in on that, and relating it to your own personal experience in situations where you have difficult personalities that you need to work with. It's becoming more aware of what is that person's starting line. And maybe sometimes we have bad bosses because they struggle with loss of control, or maybe personal issues in their lives. And if we kind of demonstrate that compassionate communication, and we get a little bit more agile regarding their cultural upbringing. Sometimes as you're finding out in this virtual world now, in many organizations, people are working with people from other countries. And so that cultural aspect comes into play. Or people that are working here but were raised in under different cultural traits and experiences that unknowingly they're actually bringing forth, or have the expectations of others recognizing these and acting in certain ways. In my past, I've come from a culture where there is a big recognition for the leader, for a person who's actually assuming that responsibility. And in the very beginning of my career, there was the expectation that these individuals would know the best for the team. And so there was this kind of a default of power to them, with the expectation that they will care for us. You know, they got our backs and they'll follow up on what we need in order to do our work. But fairly quickly, as we mature in the organization and going through different organizational either project management methodologies, life cycles, or individuals with different experiences in different industries, we find out, at least in my experience, that that's not the case. A lot of people do not acquire these leadership traits, even though we believe that leadership can be taught. And so instead, they kind of fall into that whole idea of being leaders or being managers or acting out as leaders in situations where they were not prepared for. And so they default back to what their starting lines were subconsciously. They follow up on their own cultural upbringing subconsciously. And there's this whole blind expectation that other people would really understand that and assume that would act in certain ways, and that doesn't happen. And then these conflicts and this complexity creates these conflicts in between the people in the organization. And fairly often the compassionate communication piece is kind of left out, and instead people just fall into their fight or flight mindset, where I had an experience, not personally, but somebody retold me that story, where these individuals were very adversarial in an organization, and there was almost going to be a fight between them. So the leader put them aside and said, whoever throws the first punch is out of here. So it happens. So, I mean, how do you mitigate that? How do you let this escalate to a point where you as a leader really are so blinded following whatever expectations you have to complete certain work, that you don't know what's happening in terms of your team or the people that are working for you or with you. So this is what we're trying to bring in with this book is, in one of the chapters we talk about the leadership being a lifestyle, right? It's important for anybody to understand that if they have the perception that they're good, they could be good leaders, that's a prerequisite. You have to have that idea inside you that you want to be a leader, and you have to follow up on that. Obviously, you have to read up on this and study some of the styles out there. Maybe start with our book and just kind of see where the starting lines are and understand what you know and what you need to do in order to fill up some of the gaps. But also understand that you are going to be acting as a mentor to the people that are working with you. You are going to have to build trust with them. You're going to have to understand their situations and understand that leadership doesn't start at work. It starts everywhere, in your family, at home, with your spouse, with your partner, with your community. So even if you're not in a position to be a leader in your organization, you are in a position to be a leader in your community or at home. And people are going to look up to you, and they're going to follow you. They're going to, use you as a mentor. They'll listen to what you say. They'll sometimes mimic you. If you're successful, they'll try to pretend that they'll do the same things, and sometimes that won't work out for them. But regardless of that, you are a leader, and you have to embrace that understanding that you are a leader everywhere. It's a lifestyle. It's not a 9-to-5 job. It's a 24-hour job. You consider it as a job, and I'm sure, Casey, you probably came across some of that in your experience with the military as well.
So I want to go back to the cultural thing real quick. Marisa, I see you're about to talk, and I hope we're on the same wavelength here. So one of my favorite parts of the book was where you went into the South Florida story. You talked about the cultural differences that you had going in and the expectations the students had of you and how you guys had to connect. So obviously say whatever else you were being ready to say, but I'd love to go into that topic.
Oh, from when I was a high school teacher, yeah, that was really interesting because I started in Fairfax County, in their school system where it's very diverse. The school that I was working in was typically a one-parent working professional with a higher education degree and then a stay-at-home parent. And it was probably equal moms versus dads, but I could make one phone call and be like, hey, I noticed like your child was tired today. They'd show up at the school and be like, oh yeah, last night we had, a very late soccer game or something and they were collecting homework. I can just, with like one email, they would make sure that the students' homework was done. It was like so much familial support. And then I came down to Southwest Florida and I had parents hang up on me. Like, oh, I already did high school. It's their turn, click. And I was very shocked by that. And it was the first time that I was really aware as a teacher that not everyone did have starting lines, even though, Simon, for the last 30 years of us being together, points it out to me like, oh, this person, made it through college without a car and had 3 jobs. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like it just kind of just sailed over my head until I actually started looking at it and being like, hey, yeah, that's true. So when I came down, it was a huge cultural shock, but it also made me more aware. And I think even now, like some of my friends that I speak with who knew me back in Virginia are like, you're a much nicer person. You're so much more kind, and not just like nicer kind, but just like more considerate about things where before I'd be, I might be a little bit more judgy about it. And now it's like things, I have a better understanding of like where they're coming from because of the experience of teaching in Southwest Florida. But I was going to touch on before Simon, I have this really cool example when he mentioned about, starting lines and you have to want to be a leader. And one of my friends recently, this is just recent. So if we ever did like another book of like just stories or anecdotes, this would definitely get in it. She told her little girl to clean up her room and she's like, I don't want to. And she's like, so you're just going to let it be a mess? And she used her phrase. She's like, you're the CEO of your life. So if you want to have a neat room, you have to. And she was like, okay, yes. And then she went and made like a whole checklist of everything, like of how to clean her room. And she's like, this is the process I'm going to use to clean my room, Mom. And I was like, that's perfect. You told her she was her own CEO. And most of the people that I know who've reached out to me, who've read the book, mention like taking control of their own life just by that one phrase is what really they connected with. Some of them have their own businesses, small businesses, entrepreneurial stuff. Some of them are teachers. And so a lot of like the corporate leadership stuff, they can still pull from, but it's that taking control and ownership of their own life that they really connect with. And that's, I think the first piece of learning that like, it's a privilege to be alive and be here and to be able to set your course for what you want to do. And not everyone has to be that leader of that Fortune 100 company or something. Like they can still be leaders in their community, and the child was the perfect example. The mom with the child. It's like whether you want to be a leader or not, if you're a parent, you're by default a leader because they're following your example. So that's what I was going to touch on about when Simon was mentioning about having the leadership be a choice. Sometimes we say it's a choice, but sometimes it's really not a choice. If you're going to it's a choice to be a good leader.
Yeah, no, that's 100% true. I didn't think about trying it with my kids. That probably makes sense. So if I want to try, but that is the CEO of your own life was one of my favorite parts that you guys brought up. And then near the really beginning of the book, I'm probably going to mess up the direct quote here, but you get to live life, you don't have to live life. That really resonated from the very beginning of the book. I was like, okay, this is already off to a great start. Because it's not just this is what a leader does, George S. Patton's version of leadership or whatever other general or president you want to go into. It has a very personal touch. That's what a lot of people don't understand, that leadership is a personal touch. And there's, like you guys have talked about, we talked a little earlier, there's not one right answer. There's multiple ways to do it. And authenticity is something that I go on and on about on the podcast, so the listeners probably like stop talking about it at some point. That's one of the key tenets of the organization is authenticity. People don't understand that if you're not yourself as a leader, you can't be successful. You can put on whatever mask you want to, but the best boss I ever had he actually replaced me. I was in his job temporarily for like 6 months, and then he finally got there and he took over. And he said, "Yep, this was your organization. I understand that. I'm going to respect what you've done to it, and I want you to be yourself from day one. Don't try to be anybody else, but be who you're going to be from this point on." And that was great, and that's advice I've taken and used forever. If you're the person who has different idiosyncrasies, you have different things that you like to do, whoever you actually are, live in that from the beginning, because that's what people can expect. Don't try to be a superhero, because it won't work.
I think that's a great point. Being authentic, that's really we hear that message quite a bit as of late, in terms of being open and honest. But being authentic is the most successful way to show to the others, your employees and people that you're working with, who you really are, and then stick to that. Because I've had issues in the past where I would see an individual under one light, the way they carry themselves, the way they communicate, the expectations, and then they would just broadcast some completely different message by acting in a certain way, which is in direct conflict with what they initially projected, which kind of leaves somebody to really wonder who they really are. And if they're not being authentic in this case, they lose my particular respect in terms of trust as to whether they will really be who they are in the future. Will they really have my back if I'm delivering my work under certain conditions, or if I need assistance, or if I'm struggling with something? I may not actually see the individual that I expect to see, and so then it's just like programming. If you carry this entire load of code, trying to come up with new code all the time as to how do you deal with this complexity with this individual, and try to guess their style, or how they will behave, or their behavior on a certain day when it's not consistent, it becomes very difficult to work in an organization like this. People will be actually more exhausted after an 8-hour day than if they're consistently meeting the authenticity of that individual. And so I think you hit on this quite rightly, that being authentic is very important, and sticking to that message, as opposed to changing and acting differently. So
I know you both have good perspective. Jeez, oh Pete, I keep cutting you off, Marissa. I am sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to jump in on that too, about what Simon said, because I think a lot of people don't realize that being authentic doesn't always necessarily mean letting go of your own personal control. Like, the more experiences you have, and as you cultivate that relatability, your authenticity will make subtle shifts so that you're not having to struggle to fit into certain situations. Like, I remember the first time, and it doesn't have to be big like this, but the first time you travel like to another country and you start seeing how you act versus how other people act, you can pick out like who is American, who is, from there, who's a local. Even in the States, when we travel from like Virginia to Florida, like you mentioned about the school and stuff. But the way that we start integrating these experiences into how we behave is part of our authenticity then, because it's a little piece that we pick up and we start acting like that. And so I think one of the great benefits that Simon came up with in the book about cultivating that relatability is it helps you stay authentic by using these experiences to continue to become more relatable, where you don't have to be like, okay, I'm in this situation now, I have to act this way. And then you have to pretend. And then, okay, I'm in this situation, I have to act this way. Because you've already gathered all those experiences to help you authentically move into the different scenarios that you may or may not be familiar with, or have heard about or read about in a book. So I just wanted to jump in and say that.
Perfect. So this question I'm going to directly give to Marissa first. That way I don't actually step on her on the next one. But so, having worked as an educator and been a leader in various different positions, seeing that authenticity start to emerge from the students or those that work with you, is that one of the most rewarding things that you can see? And when do you first see that personality, especially with students? I've not had to work with anybody but adults. I was in adult education for a while. But for younger students, when is the time you see their authentic personality first, and how did you cultivate that?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I love working with adult students too. So I think that's a really tough one because like typically like once you've been in a school, like I was in the high school for a while. I was the cheer coach. I worked with the band and the dancers and everything. So you get like a reputation of what type of teacher you are. So then I ended up having, you know, parents request that their student or their son's daughter or younger sibling get into my classroom. And there was like a preconceived notion about it. But the very first year, I could tell that people were, you know, they would look at me and be like, is this English? Because obviously I'm Asian. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, it's English. Like, come on in, I'm going to teach you. And that's when, you know, you see they have their guard up a little, or they're judging you, or what kind of teacher you're going to be, how you're going to behave. And I think the most rewarding part was when they finally realized, and it came at different points for different students. But again, because I was part of the extracurriculars, like it was easier to get to know me. They would come hang out in my classroom during lunches and after school and get ready for practice and stuff. But it's when they see that they don't have to lie about why they didn't get something done, or like, oh man, the bus dropped off super late, I just didn't do it, can I do it now? Or they'll come in during lunch and be like, I forgot my homework for next period, can I just do it here? And it's like, then you know that they're comfortable being around you, they're comfortable asking for your help, and they know that they need to do certain things and they want to take responsibility for it. But then like rush in and be like, can I use your computer, you know, next period I've got it. And I'm like, sure. And so we, you know, we have the student computers, and they would be hopping on doing their homework during lunch, eating pizza, you know, trying to, and that's when it's like, yeah, they know they can come to me for assistance, but they're not expecting me to do it for them, and they're taking ownership of it. So they've figured out where they can go for those resources, and they also want to do it because they could just go to their next period without having their homework done and make up some lie. But knowing that they didn't have to do that around me meant that they knew I was being myself around them, so they could be themselves around me. Did that answer the question?
It did, and I got to compliment you. You've actually gathered one of the things that a lot of leaders struggle with. And as being a military guy, I saw that a lot is, well, this is the standard. You don't meet the standard. You don't get to do this. If you're late for physical training, you're in trouble. And I got people would wonder why I didn't get on soldiers the first few times they did that. And it's kind of what we talk about. I want them to trust me. Everybody makes mistakes. We're human. Life happens. I mean, you had something go on the night before. You don't know what was going on with their family, whether it's a child or an adult. Something traumatic could happen. They could have just had other priorities. They literally could have just forgot. My daughter forgot her folder the other day for school. Okay, we had to take it to her. It happens. And the fact that you have the awareness to understand that you want them to be able to come to you and to trust you, that's a fantastic leadership quality that people struggle to develop because they don't see anything outside of themselves. Or, you know, as a military, corporations, different things like that, this is the rules. This is our values. You step outside of here, you're in trouble. And that's not all. It does need to be that way sometimes. I'm not saying you can forgive every single infraction, but you also got to remember, how would you want to be treated in that situation? What would you want somebody to do for you? And is it a trend? That's always the thing too. I used to tell. I had one guy who was habitually late, and he'd always ask me, "Well, you're not mean to the other guy. Well, this is his first time being late. You're late every other time. There's a trend. There's a problem. So let's address it." But yeah, that's impressive. It really is impressive. Most people don't get to that point. So that's very impressive.
I learned that from Simon. That's one thing about empathy. Like it is a very it can be considered a weakness in leaders if you are too empathetic and you have too large of a team. But yeah, just watching Simon work with his teams as a project manager, because he gets stuck, and I think this is in the book, but I always share this with my friends who own businesses and stuff. I'm like, I watched him get stuck with a team where he wasn't their manager. He had no authority over them. They were all from different, and I don't know what you call that, but they were all from different areas. And they had to all be on testing and stuff. And he just had to like soak it in. And like you said, like understand like that maybe if it's a habit versus like a way that they behave every time. And the fact that, and I remember reading a book about that a general wrote that we had met that came down here to give a speech. And he was like, you know, in training, you can be as hard as you want on them as long as they know that you're just trying to instill specific values so that they understand that when it does matter, when, you know, it is a life or death situation, or somebody is counting on you to be there in that second that they need you, that you are not 2 minutes late then. And those types of little lessons and like seeing the speeches and watching Simon work with like teams that he's actually dealing with it in the real world, kind of combined it all until I actually did enter the classroom. And I think that's where that came from. Otherwise, I was just, before I even took my master's, I wasn't aware. I was very much in my own self of, I'm going to teach you. I have all this knowledge and I'm going to teach you. Like, we're going to read this book and talk about, and then it didn't become like that at all. And it was like, I stopped saying I teach, English, because I heard Simon say, oh, I teach students, I teach adult learners. He didn't say, I teach ethical leadership, I teach project management. And it's like, yeah, that's true. Like, you're teaching humans. You're not teaching a subject. You're teaching humans about the subject. And it wasn't until I heard him say that I actually, pulled that into myself.
So matrix organizations, Simon, aren't those fun to try to manage?
Well, sometimes it's actually a good thing, because they will bring in structure, and some individuals work better in structure, right? And sometimes you would have a situation where, a different generation. I mean, that's one thing that today's leaders need to recognize, is the fact that we work with different types of generations. We may have baby boomers, we may have Generation X, Y, Z, all working under the same umbrella, in the same unit, the same functional department. And Marisa was just talking about this. We had situations where we had to inadvertently manage these different types of generations to accomplish a common goal. And so there's certainly different motivational factors for each of these generations. When a Generation X, we are the Xers with Marisa, and we're very motivated by following a certain goal that we're given, and sometimes we're very independent in accomplishing this. While certain other generations want to work more cooperatively, they want to converse and discuss and digest and reflect and just decide how to approach this together as a team. And so a good leader, a relatable one, would understand these types of differences and motivational practices for each one of these generations, and be able to really kind of turn this to their advantage to accomplish the common goal. And I think you mentioned majors in a classroom. I mean, in the workforce, right? And if that's the case, in some situations, you might have to apply more structure. Like in the situation you mentioned, somebody who's habitually late, they need to follow that structure, and you need to learn that it's a behavior or trait, depending on what else is going on in their life, to understand how this really impacts the team, and a common goal to accomplish that by them being late. And I've been in that boat. I've had longer commutes in my life that I don't ever want to repeat. I've gone an hour and a half to 2 hour commute to get to a workplace because of whatever choices I've made in my life. And if I did not leave at one certain time, or if I ran into traffic conditions, I would eventually arrive there late. And so it's a change that I needed to adapt to, whether I decided to stay in this organization because my lateness was impacting the goal of the organization, or whether I wanted to switch where I was living, or maybe leave even earlier than the timeline. But it's a good relatable leader will broadcast the need for that individual to be able to ascertain that their behavior and their lack of contribution impacts the team to accomplish that goal. And you mentioned earlier, it's difficult in organizations because organizations are formed to have under certain mission and certain vision and certain objectives, and they're expecting that the individuals they hire to contribute for that organization to meet that strategic goal and strategic objective, because otherwise they will fail in that global marketplace with other competitors, etc., whatever else is going on in that particular area that they're operating in. And I like to give that example always, that inverted pyramid is, we as leaders, we are at the bottom, we carry the weight, and we are shouldering the difficulties, the complexities that individuals have to deal with in order to allow these individuals to flower through with their competencies and skills to accomplish these goals. So we need to remove these impediments for them. We need to ensure that there's no conflict. We need to make sure that they have the appropriate workplace and the setting and the technology, and they're not burdened by. I had a boss that I quite often converse with Marisa about. And that individual was a bean counter, right? He would have somebody at the front door, and if you don't enter at 8 o'clock, you're written up. And if you leave earlier than 5 o'clock, you're written up. And how do you really exist in this environment? We as technologists specifically, we're not defined by this 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 workplace. I mean, we may come in a little bit later. Maybe we come in at 9 or 9:30, but we stay until 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock because we're doing deployments and doing different types of things for the systems that you cannot do during live environment when people are at work. But that was never recognized. And you have an individual like this who doesn't recognize this. What do? I mean, do you educate them? Do you try to stick to their stringent requirement? Do you start a revolution? I mean, or just leave? There are different ways that you can approach this, and what we talk about is, leadership is not hierarchical. So just because this individual craves control, and that's how they assume that leaders are supposed to act in the organization to control this time of the individuals coming in or leaving, doesn't mean that they were effective leaders. As a matter of fact, they were not relatable. They were certainly not authentic because I've seen them come in late and leave early. So, we come back to that whole idea of are they really mentors to us, or are they more of a saying one thing, do as I say, but don't do as I do, as they say. So, so this is what it kind of resonated with me when you mentioned that. How do you deal with majors in the workforces? Sometimes structure is good, but you get these different types of generations that you need to deal with. And some generations may really not respect structure. I mean, Generation Y now, we're learning that they have a completely different, Generation Z approach to how they consider the workplace and the timelines and what's important to them as opposed to some earlier generations.
The generational gaps, just it's something interesting to see, because you have the really young, the Generation Z people, completely different if you have any boomers left in your industry. Like, I don't even think the two can have a conversation where they understand what the other one's saying. I've had that happen. And like, what? I just don't see it. And then you have the two generations in the middle that are still very separated. The X and the Y are very separated. That 10 to 20-year difference really just shows. And I mean, it makes it very difficult if you're not willing to step outside of your comfort zone. You're not able to understand that everybody's motivated by different factors. And that kind of raised a question I wanted to ask. That you've probably heard it. People come for the compensation package, but they stay for the culture. So, what are some of the main cultural issues that you guys are seeing right now in the industry, or any industry at that fact, not just project management, but every leadership aspect?
I'll take that one in your organization now.
So I'm using all these filler words, and so while I'm thinking. One challenge that I actually have seen now is there's a woman who owns a company, and she is struggling with, part of our book talks about leadership development and recognizing emerging leaders. And so she's struggling with identifying emerging leaders for, I think it's Gen Z. So what's the next one? Alpha? So she's struggling with identifying this because of the culture of her organization that's always been very fluid and agile to adapt to the different, it's in construction. So to adapt to the different building code requirements and getting bids for projects, finding inspections, following government regulations, things like that. And so now she has this whole new generation coming up in the workforce that she's getting ready to promote, give more responsibility to, put them out, gather more bids, get more clientele. And it's really difficult to identify those ones that actually have the acumen and want to be leaders and want to step up and learn and take responsibility versus them just wanting to take it as experience before they move on to the next one. And so her organizational culture, the challenge she's having is that it's shifting into a close-knit longevity. Let's do some team building. We're all going to go bowling and, spend some time getting to know each other, to no, they want, their separate time. Their work is not their family. Their work is just a means, a stepping stone to get to a place. And she said that reminds her of when she first entered the workforce for those, and I don't know that they're the baby boomers now, but for the older generation who were looking to retire, that's how they were. This was their stepping stone. They've been in that position for so many years and they've earned their retirement, and they weren't flexible. They didn't want to mentor new people into the roles. And so I think what that is an organizational challenge that I'm seeing now is when the organizational culture doesn't match the new talent coming in. And so the culture of the organization either has to shift, or they can't identify emerging leaders in their organization. So where do they go for it? They're going outside, and then the people that are obviously already in there that think they should have been promoted get disturbed by the fact that they're not promoting from within. But if those people that are within aren't what the leadership is looking for. Also, another one is the big corporations. I have someone that just left a big corporation because she felt like the people that they were promoting weren't promoting the culture of the organization of what she was hired into. So I'm not exactly sure how that happened, and I would love to delve deeper into that for maybe another book. But when you promote from within, and the culture that you're hired in suddenly changes because those people who are promoted into other positions change the actual atmosphere of the team, then that's a significant challenge for people that love that company and want to be there and are very loyal and just enjoy their work. Like, they enjoy the job they're doing, and suddenly someone's promoted from within, and there's a shift, and that culture changes. It's no longer what they thought it was.
And that's always a fun one. I've had that in a couple different organizations I work for. Oh, this guy is the guy that hired you. You really like him, or lady, either way. And then they get promoted out. They promote from within somebody else. You're like, well, everything just completely shifted.
Yeah.
It's unsettling because you're like, okay, I mean, I can adapt. We can try to figure this out, but it's going from this is what I was told when I was hired. This is why I want to work for this company, and now it's something completely different.
Because everyone has different motivations when they get there. It's like, oh, now I'm the person and this is how I'm going to do it. And suddenly, like, everything that you thought you were doing and enjoyed doing is taken away from you. So
everybody wants to leave their mark. That's something I figured out too. And I mean, I'm guilty of it. We all are as a leader. You want to make sure that something you do helps somebody, or it's lasting with them. But sometimes leaders don't come in with the right mindset of how to do that. One of the best things I got told was, basically, don't change anything unless it's on fire for like the month you're in a leadership job. If it's not a major problem, learn why it's there, understand what it is. And then when you start to make changes, get the people involved. Make sure that those that you're leading understand, why are we changing it? How can we make this better? Incorporate them in the decision making. Because I know I've had bosses, and you guys may have as well, as soon as they come take over, this is the new policy. This is how life is going to be, like day one. And you're like, I didn't know it was that bad to begin with.
that's a great book title, Leave Your Mark. I'm going to remember that and credit you. Or if you would ever like to write a book called Leave Your Mark, you could talk about your podcast and,
That could be the next one. I'm working on day one leadership right now. So we'll see how that one turns out.
And then you could develop a class around it.
Yeah. That's what my one brother-in-law keeps telling me. He's like, you're missing an opportunity to do classes and stuff. Like, whenever I find the time, I know that's everyone's excuse. And it's not that if you have the time, it's what your priorities, but my 4 little ones are my biggest priorities.
Yeah.
Trying to manage it all.
I know we get asked to do like leadership workshops. Like, somebody was like, oh, do you do a training? We're a medical facility. We'd love to have you come in because doctors need to have, learn how to cultivate their relatability. Our patients are very diverse here. And I'm like, we don't have time. And like, you have time. You just don't, we see you go for like a run or something. You have time. And it's like, to develop the actual training of it. I understand what you mean when you say you need time.
Self-care is not time. That's what. If I'm doing something I need 10 minutes for myself for, that's not time. That's literally booked in. That's to be. So Simon, do you have any other thoughts on the industry trends?
I think what we're going to continue to see now with the situation with the interest rates, that we have this steep increase in interest rates, and then suddenly, we see the federal government freezing this. This is going to impact organizations. I mean, they're going to have to do we're starting to see layoffs, and I've seen that cycle through to the economic methodology, if you wish, the life cycle of organizations over, I don't know, over the past 25, 30 years repeat itself. So what happens in this situation is we're going to start to see more organizations trying to do more with less resources. So we'll see more responsibilities on individuals, which is going to put pressure on them because they will lay off people in order to be able to accomplish certain strategic objectives under the conditions, the economic conditions where you do not have enough resources, because of the fact that now it's going to be more expensive to get money in order to do certain things because of these rates that are high. So as a result, cultures are going to shift. Organizations are going to put more pressure, especially in the project management field. We'll start seeing that there's going to be resource-constrained projects, time-constrained projects in order to compete a little bit more with organizations in the marketplace on their pricing, or depending on the strategies that they've adopted. That's going to cause the culture of the organization to shift, where there's going to be more pressure on individuals to potentially do things faster, maybe work with new personalities that they've not worked in the past. There might be some more job rotations and things like that occurring, so there might be a little bit more pressure to adapt and get out of their comfort zones. And we are going to see those changes transpire in organizations, and we're going to see a lot of individuals coming back to schools, and they're going to try to re-skill themselves or upskill themselves in order to be able to integrate better, or potentially say, look, I can't deal with this organization anymore, I got to move to a different one, but to do that I need to have these new skills or that new education. So this is what I expect to see in the trends over the next couple of 3 years until rates stabilize, and then we start seeing this whole organizations rehiring individuals and starting to grow this whole idea of doing things creatively as opposed to under resource constraints. So it will be an interesting time, the way we live in right now, to see these things, and applying these relatable leadership approach to becoming a better leader in your organization under these conditions is critical. So that's what I wanted to say in conclusion.
So some questions I always like to bring up near the end of the episode. So if you've listened to any, you may have a heads up, but hopefully you didn't actually, because that way I can hit you with some surprise ones. So easy one first. What do you guys want to do in the next 2 years?
Oh God, this is gonna sound funny. We've got this. Well, we are running the Chicago Marathon, which is a world marathon, one of our first world marathons in October. Both of us are running. Marisa was accepted, and I'm actually fundraising for it. So this is our goals for preparing for it. We are very big on conditioning ourselves and accomplishing certain goals. We've got another marathon coming up in Miami. So you asked us what we want to do. These are the things that are just in our immediate view, but we are working on quite a few papers, and quite frequently, I would say every maybe 3 or 4 months, we publish a new paper on different types of topics, especially related to project management and leadership. So we talk about strategic project management, we talk about scope creep and the impact on projects in our recent publications that are we did just this past year. So that's another thing that we're pursuing, is expanding our portfolio of publications on lessons. We also have a few ideas about traveling overseas and kind of embracing some new cultures, and we'll see how that's going to figure out over the next 1 or 2 years to kind of broaden our respect and appreciation and understanding of different cultures, because we get to work with different cultures in our consulting business, and that will only help us become better, more culturally agile. So that's what I see as running, working, and publishing and teaching.
Oh, that's good to know. No, I mean, coming up, I do want to mention, since we have the opportunity to, and I know it'll be passed by the time I see this, but we are running for Home Base, which is a foundation for veteran family care. And Jason Cooper was part of my leadership Collier class, and he's the one that introduced me to the foundation. So a lot of what we're doing with our marathon running is to raise awareness for charities. Simon's always been very philanthropic with where to give back and how to give back to the community. And I think, like he mentioned, for Chicago, he chose Team Paws because it's a no-kill animal foundation. And for us, we're very big on like mental health, veteran support, families. Yeah, my father was in the Air Force and he passed away when I was very, very young. And if we had known about Home Base, or they had that organization, then it's through Mass General. It was just very touching for me to read about it and see all the families that they're helping and the support that they are giving to veterans and families. So that's one thing, is running to create awareness. We're very big into social responsibility. And then I don't know if it's a secret because he didn't mention it or not, but our next big like leadership project management project is looking at how project managers shift into the product development phase. Because a lot of times, like now, especially with like just AI. Oh, and that was the other thing, is researching. So in the next 2 years, we're really looking at researching like the different types of workspaces, like not like virtual, but like I was like, would it be cool if we all just like got to wherever we were and we all just put on our little goggles or whatever, and we were in like the metaverse office space. So it's like we were all in an office, but we're not, instead of just work from home. But yeah, basically shifting from being a project manager into a product owner, because that's a lot of what we're seeing with software, and actually in the marketing and publicity space on the publishing side, we're seeing that too.
So that's a good point. Product owner, look into it if you haven't looked into it yet. Something you may want to pursue if you're in this industry, or I guess any industry at that point. So what are some of the places you guys want to travel to?
So you want to take that one?
No.
We're going to explore Western Europe, so that would include France and Spain, and potentially maybe portions of Scandinavia, like Norway, and Iceland was on the table, but now with the volcano that erupted, we'll probably skip Iceland. So Western Europe first, and then maybe I would love to run Japan in a Tokyo Marathon, so we'll probably go to Japan at some point, maybe in the next, I would say, 2 years or 3 years, and just explore a little bit Southeast Asia, Japan, maybe Marisa's country of origin, South Korea. So, that's on the table as well.
Just anywhere
Wonderful.
we can go.
Yes, I was stationed in Japan for a year and a half. Wonderful place, lots of awesome things to do. You've never seen so many people before in your life. We lived like 30 minutes outside of Tokyo, and I didn't realize how large it was until you got there. It's like 50 million people in the metro area. So, I mean, people talk about New York City being big, and I've been to New York, I've been to other large places. Tokyo is a totally different ballgame.
Where do you recommend we go?
So in Japan, my favorite place, even though I despise cold weather, is Sapporo, which is on the northern island of Hokkaido. And it is beautiful. But it's also it was comfortable for me because it's an Americanized city. It was built up by the U.S. after the Second World War. So it's the normal American block-style city, where Tokyo is utter chaos. It's like 7 or 8 roads stacked on top of each other in some places. And there's like, you're on a 2-way street, then becomes a 1-way street going the opposite direction. And so Tokyo's nuts. Sapporo, went there in the wintertime during Christmas, beautiful display. Has a nice little downtown market, but it's also all enclosed. So you don't even have to be outside to see a lot of it.
Oh, wow.
So, yes, I really love Sapporo. Tokyo is awesome. And then you have Yokohama, which is like right across Tokyo Bay. It's a beautiful place as well. The funny thing is, if you read into Japanese history, I didn't realize it until I went there how much impact the U.S. has actually had and how much of a presence the U.S. has had in Japan, basically from the mid-1800s on.
Wow.
So it's very interesting, the two cultural connections, and you realize they were at a major conflict with each other. It's kind of surprising because how connected they were beforehand and how connected they were afterwards.
I wrote them down.
Unfortunately, I didn't make Korea. It was on my list of places to go, but I've not gone. I'd love to go at some point. I've heard nothing but awesome things about South Korea. But I didn't get to see a whole lot of other Asia places except for Guam. And Guam is very tiny. The hardest question. Go ahead, Sam.
No, certainly. We'll definitely take your advice, and I would love to see those places. Yeah.
So the last question I get is kind of a hard one for a lot of people. It's one that makes you stop and think. So if you didn't get any prep work, you feel free to take a pause and try to think of what you want to say. But who wants to go first?
That's what the question is.
I'll go.
Right,
Go ahead. I'll go.
All right, give it to Marisa. So there's a lot of pivotal times in people's lives, but I try to pick one that's very similar for most of us, going in from either junior high to high school, middle school to high school, whatever you want to call it there. If you could talk to your 14-year-old self, what would you say?
Oh, I would tell my 14-year-old self that I am the CEO of my life. Back then, I did a lot of stuff because I thought like that's what I needed to do to fit in. I was, well, from the book, I did mention that like I grew up in a white Catholic family in New England. And so I did, cheerleading and gymnastics, and I took piano lessons and, made sure that I had all the latest fashion. And then sometime like later in life, I did this minimalist thing where I did the 40 hanger project. So I took everything out of my closet, put 40 hangers up, and I just hung up 40 items. And then that was it. I got rid of everything else. And then the next year I was like, I'm not going to buy anything designer this year. I'm just going to use the designer stuff I have. And so I would tell my 14-year-old self that like, yeah, these experiences that you're doing now, like the gymnastics, the cheerleading, and, dance and stuff is fun, but it shouldn't let it define you, and that you are the CEO of your life. And so you should do more of what you love versus more of what you think everyone else loves for you to do.
That's awesome.
There's actually like a book. It's called My Dear Teen Self. So like we always do like these exercises where we're like, what, dear teen self, what would you want to do? So, I love that question. That was so great.
Well, you already had the answer to the test if you're ready for it. Jeez, I got to come up with a harder one for you. So Simon, what's your answer?
I would say that, yeah, I mean, life is, that's what Emerson said, a series of lessons. So, we got to leave it to understand it. So, you're going to make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, move forward. Don't beat yourself up about this. Accumulate these lessons, and then, learn more languages, number one, while you're young, because it's easier. And then, pursue your passions. That's very important, because if we get kind of diverted into following other people's expectations for how your life is supposed to develop, eventually you're going to waste quite a bit of time in order to make a curve and then settle into exactly what you do. And a lot of the individuals that are now retired, and if you ask them, well, what is your recommendation? Be like we talked about this, be authentic and do the things that really matter to you, as opposed to following what somebody else thinks they're supposed to be doing. That is going to maximize your, happiness or joy, if you wish, with your existence, as opposed to trying to fit in and be under unnatural conditions or not authentic, because that creates this whole tension and obviously physical ailments, if you wish. If individuals are wondering sometimes, why am I so sick or whatever, it's because you're not being authentic. I mean, if you're being who you are, if you're following your own path that you feel passionate about, quite a bit of that conflict and tension and negative energy and self betterment, if you wish, or whatever you call yourself, that you cannot fit into certain organizations for whatever reason, it's because you don't follow your own path. So I would talk to myself about this, and potentially, hopefully I'll listen, because you never know. I mean, you can tell yourself that, and then be like, no, I'm just going to do my own thing. And then I'll find out that what you're saying is real. And I don't know if I've ever had that conversation with an adult at the time. I'm sure I have, maybe with a grandparent or maybe my father. I just don't recall, because obviously I did not follow what I'm talking to myself about now, and learn these lessons the hard way. So that's what I would do.
I think that's awesome perspective as well. And that what you hinted on right there at the end, you try to instill that wisdom in others, especially people that are younger than you. just don't listen. I've noticed how my kids like, maybe want to try this. And they'll be like, no. And then it turns out, yeah, I probably should have tried. But it's the trial and error. And, it's your life. You got to figure out what fits best for you. And you brought up another great point. I don't know if I'd have listened to my own advice at 14. So you have no idea how that's going to go. As we get close to wrapping this up here, any closing thoughts that anyone you'd like to share?
I always like to ask people, like, what advice have you had from hosting podcasts that really stuck with you from someone else? Just to reiterate it to your listeners now, but also so that we can go away with it, because I always love to learn stuff.
I did a lot of listening to other people that I admired, how they manage themselves, how they would go about introducing the topics, what kind of questions were interesting. And I mean, even like your 14-year-old self kind of question. One of my favorite is a sports podcast, but it's a guy who does a really great job. He's the Bengals radio announcer. He asks a question when he interviews all the players. His final question is, well, who would you, if you got dinner with anybody, dead, alive, from any point through history, who would it be and why? So I really like that. That question's very deep, and it's not what you'd expect from this kind of program. You're talking about plays and strategies and stuff like that, but then all of a sudden, bam, he hits people with life questions at the end. That's really good, and it actually gives you to connect with these people that you want to cheer for. And even if they're not maybe the most major player on the team, it makes you want to embrace that person because their story. So it makes them very relatable. So you try to pick up on what makes you the most comfortable. And I dislike talking about myself, so sorry. I'll try not to do too much. But this podcast had honestly been a dream of mine since before I'd done my master's program. I just felt like people have interesting stories. I like to tell people stories and be able to incorporate that, give it to people for advice, how it's going to make their life better, and just try to package it. So, I mean, if I give advice on podcasting, one, find a good platform that's going to allow you to actually be able to easily edit and record. Audacity is fantastic for free audio. Canva is the best place I've found for video. And then understand, to build your audience, you have to have a good message and be consistent. And that's one of the hardest parts when you're starting out. When you have 1 to 2 listens an episode, 3 listens, and you just want to give up. You can't. You got to keep pushing. The more people you get involved, and make it less about you. Keep the focus off of you, it works for like Joe Rogan and other people like that. You can insert whatever name you want to, but they already had a major, huge platform. So people will come to their content purely just because of their major platform. But yeah, that'd be my biggest advice on podcasting.
Well, congratulations on embarking on that path, and I know it's difficult. I mean, we love watching YouTube videos. We learn quite a bit from watching and listening. And what I believe you're doing is excellent in educating, your listeners and viewers as well with these different perspectives. And it's important. And do talk about yourself, obviously, because you are an expert, and you have quite a few lessons. And I do encourage, that's what I do with my students, as you know, is I ask you to talk as much as you can about your experiences, because this is really how we build these kind of mental frameworks. And we watch you on TV at night, Marisa and I. We watch these different types of YouTube lessons and things that people share, and vicariously we live through that, and then we are learning new things. So definitely talk about yourself. Do not be shy about that.
Appreciate that. This has been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed talking about you. If you guys have not gone out and purchased it yet, there is no box. Go out there, check it out. It is available on Audible. That's where I listen to it. You can also get a nice hard copy off of Amazon or probably any bookstore at this point. So just stop by your favorite venue, pick it up, and definitely enjoy the book.
Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. Is there anywhere they can follow you at?
On Instagram on There Is No Box, and then Simon has LinkedIn.
Very nice.
Thank you for listening to
It's been
Constructive
fun.
Curiosity. Visit constructivecuriosity.com to learn more about our mental performance training, career coaching, and business management consulting services. Constructive Curiosity has the insight to get it right. Thank you for listening and keep being the best version of yourself.